So hey guys on YouTube, thanks for tuning in. This is our deck tech here for Modern. We're playing a RACKdos deck. So the base of the deck, the land base is 22 lands. We've got 4 Blackleaf Cliffs, 2 Blood Crypts to fetch up, 4 Bloodstained Mires, Garen Caverns, which is very good at making double black for Smallpox. And it's very good at making double red for Pillage in the sideboard, which we'll get to shortly. So the double black, double red filter is very useful as a one-of. Ironically, we drew it as a one-of land that was colorless the other day and got punished for it, but I think it's still worth including in the list. We've got 1 Marsh Flats and 1 Blue to Delta to bring our fetch land total up to 6. Those ones can only fetch swamps or blood crypts though. We got 2 mountains in the list, 'cause sometimes you want to fetch a second mountain. 4 swamps in the list, and 3 Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. So that looks... You'll see some similarities to a mono black 8-rack list. It's just got a lot more red splash sources. Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth is also really sweet because once you get Urborg out, you can just use your Bloodstained Mire, fetch for 1, and fetch a mountain, which becomes a mountain swamp, which is an original dual land. So that's kind of a cool play that this deck has with the Urborgs, is that you basically have original dual lands. We got 4 Mercia's Baubles. That's just to redraw, thin the deck out, whatnot. It's recurable with our companion LaRousse, which we'll get to in a sec. The basis of the 1-drops is mostly discard spells and rack effects. We got 2 Funeral Charms just because it's a modal card. Target player discards a card. Target creature gets +2/-1. That's good at killing like mana dorks, small things with 1 toughness. And then target player discards a card at instant speed is very good because you can just make your opponent discard a card on their draw step. And if they didn't draw an instant, too bad for your opponent. We got 4 Inquisition of Kozilek's. That's like the meat of the deck. Take a card 3 CMC or less. That's pretty well most cards in Modern we care about playing this deck. 4 Raven's Crime. This is one of the best cards. You can retrace it with extra lands. Prevents you from flooding out. Would never play less than 4 of. Shrieking Affliction, the best of the 2 rack effects. Again, would never play less than 4 copies. It's also an enchantment, not an artifact, so it's a little harder to target. And technically, the math of 3 damage on 1 life or 0 life is slightly better than the math and the damage of the rack for killing. I've had this discussion deeply with a lot of other rack players, and they agree with me. Shrieking Affliction is only like maybe 0.5% to 1% better than the rack, but still better than the rack nonetheless. So now you know. Shrieking Affliction better than the rack, just minorly. We got 2 copies of Thoughtseize. That just helps take some bigger cards that we sometimes care about, and we want to play like 6 copies of Inquisition ideally, but we can't, so we have to play 2 Thoughtseize. We got 2 Lightning Bolts for finishing our opponent off or removing creatures or whatever we need. Got 2 Nile Spell Bombs for main board Graveyard Hate. We can also pay a black when we put it in our graveyard to draw a card. So it essentially cycles to draw a card as well. So that's 2 more copies of a card that cycles for LaRousse, which we'll get into. And then 3 copies of the rack to finish out our 1-drops. Not quite as good as Shrieking Affliction, but we wanted enough rack copies in the deck. So we have 7 racks plus 4 Croxas, which act the same as racks, basically, for finishing your opponent off. So in our 2-drop slot, we got 4 Croxas. This card's great. Never play less than 4. This is the reason why we're playing black-red, is because of Croxa. Croxa's so powerful. Yeah, just read the card. I don't really have anything more to say on it. The card's busted. We got 1 Angrath's Rampage. So that's a modal card. Target player sacks an artifact. Target player sacks a creature. Target player sacks a planeswalker. It's pretty good. 4 smallpox. Again, great card. Great card. Would never play less than 4. It's symmetrical, but not, because we don't really play many creatures in our deck. And when we have a creature out, then we're just ahead with creature damage and we don't need to play smallpox. 1 collective brutality main board. We need about 3 collective brutalities in the deck list to be able to reliably beat red. Mono red burn or mono red prowess. We've opted to play 1 in the main board. You could opt to play 2 in the main board as well. It just depends on how much red you think you're going to run into. Very good card with all the modes. Great against red decks especially. And it's pretty good against control too, because you just duress them for 2, which doesn't really matter. And finally, rounding out our main board, we have 1 copy of Kolaghan's Command. Just a modal spell that we can use. Mostly target player discard a card and kill something or destroy an artifact with it. But we can just return a Croxa to our hand and replay the Croxa without escaping it to discard a card from our opponent and hopefully make them lose 3. So that's the main board of the deck. The sideboard here is quite vast and large. Not sure if it's the best right now for the meta, but I liked it playing the Chimera event on Friday, and I liked it playing the league I played afterwards. We have 1 of Ravenous Trap. That's just a good graveyard hate card. If your opponent puts 3 or more cards into their graveyard this turn, you've activated my trap card, so haha. Bontus, destroy all creatures, and then your lands don't untap, but it's only a 3-drop, so it's easier against those super fast aggro decks. You got 2 copies of it. Used to play Ensnaring Bridge, but our deck is a slightly creature-based deck now. Slightly, I say, because we still play Smallpox unfairly and then play our creatures after we play Smallpox. The last 2 collective brutalities, already discussed that, need them somewhere in the list, so they're in the sideboard. 1 copy of Fatal Push, just good against decks where you need to interact with creatures. Could play another Lightning Bolt, but generally if you're boarding in to kill creatures, you just want Fatal Push, it's better. We got 2 copies of Pillage, destroy target artifact or land, can't be regenerated. This is the exact card that Mono Black 8-Rack struggles with. This is like the perfect card. If this card was printed 1 black, I don't know if I'd be playing red rack. I might still be playing black rack. But this card is definitely a huge draw to the color red, just because it has 2 effects on it that black cannot get anywhere else in Modern. We have LaRousse, our companion, which we'll go over in a minute. We have 2 more Angrath's Rampages, just because it's a really good spell for killing stuff. It also kills planeswalkers and stuff like that, so it's good against a lot of decks. We have 2 Soul Guide Lanterns. So when it enters the battlefield, you exile a card from a graveyard, and then you can sack it to exile each opponent's graveyard, or pay 1 and sack it to draw a card, so it can cycle as well. It's kind of like a different Nile Spellbomb. Nile Spellbomb's better in the main. This card's better in the side, I think, because this one just targets 1 card right away when it comes into play. But if you use it to sack the graveyard, you don't get the chance to draw off of it, whereas Nile Spellbomb, you do get the chance to draw off of it. And then 2 copies of Dampening Sphere. That's just for our Tron matchup, which is pretty bad, or for Storm and Spell combos, which is pretty decent. So we board in the 2 Damping Spheres and usually beat them. So, last but not least, we have LaRousse as our companion. So with LaRousse, we have the option to play some spells. You can play anything. Let's bring the card back up on the viewer here for a sec. So each turn you may cast a permanent spell from your graveyard with converted mana cost 2 or less. So every turn we could replay a bauble and draw 2 cards per turn, always knowing what our opponent's going to draw, which is pretty sweet. That puts us very far ahead. We can replay a destroyed Shrieking Affliction or Rack that our opponent has destroyed with LaRousse. That's a very good play too. And we can also replay Nile Spellbomb to recur Graveyard Hate. We can also just replay Nile Spellbomb and pay a black every turn to draw a second card as well. It's not quite as efficient as the Mercia's Bauble for 0, but drawing 2 cards a turn, even at the cost of a couple mana, is still quite worth it. And then finally, the last card we can return is Croxa, which is a nice one to return. It doesn't get a cast for its escape cost, so it basically just makes your opponent discard a card and hopefully lose 3 life and rack them out a bit. That's been our deck tech here on Black Red 8 Rack. I'm going to be posting it up on YouTube. If you guys are watching on YouTube, thanks for watching. Feel free to put something in the comments if you like the video. I'm going to try and get into more of these videos in the future, more deck techs and whatnot. So that's our deck tech for, as we call it, RACKdos. Thanks for tuning in.